All right, everybody, let's go ahead and get started. So once again, my name is Kevin Hancock, Director of Solutions here at Exostar, and thanks for joining me today for Simplifying Compliance, how to align your NIST self-assessment with CMMC requirements. Before we get started, just a few housekeeping details. So today's session is scheduled to last 45 minutes to an hour. Now, that does include Q&A, but you are going to be muted during today's presentation. People have submitted questions prior to today's session, and so I have those questions that were submitted teed up at the end. You can also submit questions via the chat feature. I've got a colleague on the line with me who'll be answering those as they come in over chat. If for some reason we have an outage, just wait for a minute and try to reconnect. You can do that in a couple different ways. You can just refresh your screen and it should start again, or you can use that link that you receive via email and come back into the session in that manner as well. If at any time you'd like to speak with one of our certification assistant experts, request a copy of this slide deck. Oh, and by the way, since the one question we invariably get over chat will be, am I going to get this presentation? The answer is yes. You will, as a follow-up to today's session, receive a copy of the slides I'm presenting today, as well as a link to the recording of today's session. But if you have other questions you'd like to have answered, you can reach out to us again in a couple different ways. You can email us at cmmc-team@exostar.com. You can also come to our website, www.exostar.com. There's a chat feature there on every page, and we'd be more than happy to answer your questions via that method as well. All right, so during today's discussion, I'm going to first cover a quick overview of where we are in the current state of the CMMC 2.0 program. We're then going to talk about the material you need to gather to go into a system security plan. And the system security plan is what you're building to answer the question, if you will, or the definition of where do I store, process, and transmit controlled unclassified information that I might receive, and the controls I have around that. So there's a lot of information you need to gather or be ready to gather as part of that overall assessment. We'll cover that. We'll cover about how to go about doing a self-assessment and how you score yourself in that self-assessment, the follow-ups to the self-assessment, and then I'll dive into Exostar's certification assistant application and show you actually how you would do that within that application as well. Because this is about not necessarily just doing a one-time self-assessment. It's really about managing your overall CMMC program, ensuring that at any time you know where you are and where you need to get to, and what, if you will, you need to do to reach that score of 110, where you've implemented all the necessary controls to have a CMMC assessor come on site, complete my assessment, and give me that certification, if you will. We'll then do a quick review. I'll answer those questions that were submitted, and then we'll wrap up. So with that, let me dive into the presentation. So where we are in the latest CMMC ruling. So the Code of Federal Regulations, that's what CFR stands for. So 32 CFR went into effect on 12/16/2024. This implemented the CMMC program in that you can now schedule those assessments. The assessment guides and all the supporting materials around the CMMC program are now, if you will, valid and ready to be used. There are certified third-party assessment organizations out there today ready to schedule your assessment and complete that and go ahead and certify you as CMMC compliant. So the program itself is in effect. However, it's not yet appearing in DoD contracts. And that's that second bullet, right? That's 48 CFR. That's the acquisition rule for the CMMC program. That's the thing that's not yet passed and in effect. That, and that's working its way through the process. So the major difference between CMMC and what we have today, because there are current rules and regulations around controlled unclassified information, is that we're moving away from a self-attestation model to a third-party assessment model. What that means, and I'll cover that in the next slide. But what we've also further defined are the other players in this space of securing and being compliant with storing, processing, and transmitting CUI. They've better defined what a cloud service provider is and the requirements around that. And they further defined what the requirements around if you're using an external service provider and what those requirements are as well. And those are all part of the assessment guides and the continuing dialogue that is out there around CMMC. A quick overview of the program, right? So CMMC puts together a program of 3 different levels. This is based on the material you're going to receive to fulfill a contract from the government or from a prime contractor because you've signed a subcontract with them. So as part of that, you may receive information or you may create information that's either just federal contract information. If that's the case, then you're level 1, and there are 15 requirements that you've got to satisfy. There's an annual self-assessment and an annual affirmation that you do these 15 things. Level 2 has 2 different kinds of assessments. For a small number of organizations in this category, they're going to allow you to self-assess against your compliance with the 110 requirements in NIST 800-171. But for the majority of folks in level 2, they're going to require this third-party assessment. So you'll need to engage with what's called a C3PAO, a certified third-party assessment organization, to do an assessment of your compliance with those controls. They'll do that assessment. They will certify you or not, and you'll do this once every 3 years. If you're an organization at level 3, you have some additional requirements. In addition to those 110 requirements, there are an additional 24 from NIST 800-172. And again, that's going to be a 3-year assessment done by DIBCAC, not by a C3PAO organization. Regardless, if you do this, you're going to have to yearly affirm. So there's that annual affirmation that your organization continues to do these things. I've got the link there from the DoD website about CMMC. This is really a great source of information about all your questions around CMMC. It's also got presentations from the DoD about about other things that you might have questions about in the CMMC program. Now, once the CMMC program takes effect, right, and that's 60 days after the 48 CFR is finalized, you'll start to see CMMC language or can start to appear in contracts. But there's still also an implementation phased approach from that point on, right? So that initial phase after that 48 CFR effective date is a year long, where level 1 and level 2 will be self-assessments. Phase 2 is when you'll start to see the requirement for the level 2 certification. That'll be 12 months after the implementation. And the reason they're phasing this in is because there is an ecosystem of C3PAOs out there, right? There's not one for one, so there is going to be, a timing mechanism of when you need to schedule these things. So hence the phased approach. Then after that second year, we start phase 3. That's where you're going to start to see these third-party requirements around level 3. And then phase 4 is the full implementation. However, there is a caveat, right? That's that blue bar across the bottom, right? So in some procurements, the DoD may implement CMMC requirements in advance of the planned phase. So, based on the program you're going to be bidding on, there may be some requirements, kind of ahead of these phased of the phased approach you see here. So just keep that in mind. Now, regardless of whether or not CMMC is in place, there are contractual requirements you may have today because you have contracts with the Department of Defense or you're a subcontractor to somebody that does. You may already have the DFARS clauses that you see here, the 7012, the 7019. Those have requirements today around controlled unclassified information. Right? If you've got the 7012 clause in your contract, you attest that you secure controlled unclassified information in accordance with NIST 800-171. It's a self-affirmation. You're allowed to have plans of action and milestones. Those are things that you need to address in those 110 controls because you haven't fully implemented them. You're allowed to manage those controls to closure, et cetera, but you've still got to have that CMMC program in place, or I should say the NIST 800-171 program in place. If you've got the 7019 clause, then you should have done a self-assessment based on the NIST 800-171 alpha. That's the assessment guide. It gives you a scoring system around each of the individual controls, which then gives you a numeric score of how you're doing around CMMC compliance. You then need to take that numeric score and enter it into the supplier performance risk system. That's the SPRS system. That's a DoD website where you go in, enter your cage code, go into the application, and put in that score. This is one of the things the Department of Defense uses to evaluate supplier performance risk. It's not the only factor, but it is one of the factors they use. So when we sit down to do that self-assessment, because this is one of those things that it should be doing today, but regardless, what you need to do to start to build your CMMC program is first determine where CUI resides within your systems and who in your systems may store, process, or transmit that CUI, right? Because it's both the users, the systems, the information flows through, and the individuals that might be responsible for administering or doing support or things like that around those systems. And the reason they're included is because sometimes those folks, because of their permissions, have they actually have access to the information. So you should take a look at your different contracts, determine how CUI flows through your system. So if I receive a document from the Department of Defense that has a CUI label, how does it enter into my system? Is it sent via email? Do I go to an SFTP site and download it? If I do that, how do I, where am I storing that information? Is it on my laptop? Am I moving it to a secure file store? Am I printing it out and then storing it in a file cabinet? How am I backing up that information if I am storing it electronically? Who in my system or who in my organization has access to it, may need to manipulate that data, all of that kind of stuff. Who supports those systems, as I mentioned before? Where are those systems or those file cabinets or those printers or whatever might be working on that information? Where are they physically located? And is there a physical component to my security plan? And what we're building out is that data flow diagram, which is one of the supporting elements of a system security plan. Because when the assessors come to you, they're going to ask you, okay, so what is the extent of your system security plan, right? How big is that? And one of the things they'll look to do is see, well, let's look at your data flow diagram and determine what the boundary of is this system. That then helps for you to build that network diagram. So show me the different components. And these are the way you break down those different components, right? Or do these systems, these things, store, process, or transmit CUI? If they do, then they're CUI assets. Is this something that doesn't store CUI, right? It's like a firewall or some other kind of device, a multi-factor authentication fob or a CAT card or something like that. Those things are typically, those security protection assets. They help us secure the CUI, but they don't actually manipulate the CUI. They don't store it at all. It's either just passed through or it's a different kind of component. You may have third parties that manage a part of your system. And because of that, those aren't necessarily part of your organization, but they are contractor risk managed assets. Then you may have other assets that are part of your manufacturing facility. They're part of your floor. They're cut and die machines, things like that, printers, etc. That they may or may not store or transmit CUI, but they don't necessarily have a full operating system or a way to get into them or anything like that. So those things need to be accounted for. They need to be part of your scope. And you may have, your C3PAO organization may want to see some risk mitigation controls that you have in place to, fence those assets out, make sure only certain people use them, those kinds of things. And then there may be other things that just aren't involved in this. Now, the assessors are going to want to know why they're there, what they're doing, but you need to just, they shouldn't be part of your overall SSP. They're outside the boundary, if you will. And this is another one of those things that then becomes part of your overall system security plan. Now, once you kind of gather the information that defines that boundary, then we need to take a look at the individual controls that we need to have in place to meet NIST 800-171, right? So there are 110 controls across 14 different families or categories. And then within each of these 110 controls, there are certain elements that you need to have as part of that control. And we'll talk about that in just a second. I'll kind of illustrate this. I'll try to illustrate this a little better with an example of what you're actually trying to do within that control, or how you're going to have that control assessed. Because at the end of the day, what we're going to do is first, you're going to do a self-assessment, determine if you do these things. If you do, then you get to mark this control as implemented. And you'll be comfortable when that assessor comes in to look at your system security plan that you have these things in place. And so this is an example taken straight from the 800-171 Alpha, the assessment guide. So this is requirement 3.1.3, control the flow of CUI in accordance with approved authorizations. The NIST 800-171 controls don't necessarily give you a step-by-step guide on how to do this. They give you that broad control. They give you the assessment objectives. So as part of your implementation of this control, you need to have flow control, that you have policies in place to control the flow of CUI. You've got methods and enforcement mechanisms for controlling that flow. You've got those sources and definitions. This is where the network diagrams and the data flow diagrams come into play, because you know where those interconnected systems are and you've identified them. you have an authorization flow or an approval process to say, hey, this role in our organization needs access to CUI, and this is how we approve that. And then who are the approvers for that authorization, and how are we enforcing those controls? So once we've answered these questions in our implementation, we then can test our organization to make sure we do what we say that we do. And then we would want to test that to make sure the people that are doing these things know what they're doing. We'd want to gather that evidence as proof to the assessors that we do these things. And then obviously we're going to periodically test that we do these things. We're going to review this to make sure that we're still in accordance, we're still doing these things, that type of thing. So that's why this is an overall CMMC program and why you need to manage it as such. Now, in the assessment guide, it gives you a numerical score for each of those 110 controls. And then if you've implemented that control, you get 1, 3, or 5 points. So your score is going to range somewhere between a -203 to 110. Now, that bullet there about POAMs only allowed for controls worth 1 point. So if I'm doing a self-assessment right out the gate, right, as my initial thing, I may have many more than just the 1 point controls that I haven't implemented yet. That 1 point demarcation is when the assessor's there, right? So if an assessor comes on site, you're allowed not to be fully compliant, and they're not going to automatically fail you. They're going to, if it's these certain ones, and they're 1 point controls, and there's a further definition there, then they're going to give you a conditional approval, and you're going to have 180 days to close those POAMs. And if you don't, then you're going to fail. But if this is just an internal assessment, you want to know where you stand today, you should create a POAM every time you haven't implemented a particular control, and you should manage that POAM to closure. These are the different points values. This is where I got them. So like I said, you will get this slide deck, so you'll be able to go to these things and see them. Now, one caveat, and we had this question, so I'll kind of emphasize this twice. NIST 800-171-R2. So Rev 2 is the NIST 800-171 version that is called out in CMMC by the Department of Defense. You'll see when you find these documents online that Rev 2 has been discontinued or superseded by Rev 3. Now, that's true for NIST, right? NIST 800-171 came out with a new revision of NIST 800-171. However, with that said, DoD is utilizing Rev 2 as the standard for CMMC. Now, it's confusing, but that's what it says. So these are those POAMs that when an assessor comes on site, even though these are worth 1 point, these can't be part of the controls you don't have in place, or you haven't implemented these yet. So these are 1 point controls. However, these need to be in place when that C3PA organization comes on site to look at your organization. And then, right, if other 1 point controls aren't done, you've got 180 days to close out that plan of action and milestones. You'll then contact that same C3PA organization that did your original assessment. They'll verify that you've closed those out, and then they'll, if you will, pass you, right? And you'll be certified for level 2 CMMC. They'll enter that into the EMAS system, and you'll be able to say, yep, we're CMMC level 2 certified. And that'll be good for 3 years. And then you'll have to annually affirm that you still are compliant. So that's the overall program. Now, let me dive into Exostar Certification Assistant to show how you can do this with a tool to help you evaluate and kind of keep up to date and keep all this information in one place. So I've got Certification Assistant running here. I've already started to populate the system. So when you come into Exostar Certification Assistant, this will all be blank. And you'll really start here at the organization info. And this is where you start to define just that, your organization. And as part of this, you're going to define the system within your organization that stores, processes, or transmits CUI. So this is just about your organization, right? Here's our name, our address, right? I'm part of Exostar. This is our address. These are the people who are involved, our system owner's address, phone number, email, etc. Additional POCs you might have, right? Point of contacts. We want to put our logo on our SSP, so you can upload your logo there to personalize it for your organization. You can have more than one other POCs because there might be, you may have external parties as well, that an MSP or somebody like that who's helping out your organization to fulfill part of the requirements. You then start to define that overall system. And this is where we're going to start to upload that network diagram. We're going to upload a system boundary, right? That data flow diagram. So we're going to upload that. And then we could, whoops, sorry, should have done that. We're going to upload that and show that image as well. We could also, right, we're using an external system. Exostar's managed Microsoft 365, so we're leveraging that system and its shared responsibility matrix, its body of evidence and things like that. So we're going to leverage that system as part of our overall system. So that's an external service provider providing a FedRAMP cloud service, and we're going to leverage that as a part of our overall system as well, right? And then we may also have other some requirements when we start to build out that each of the individual practices. And that's really where we go next, right? So we'd want to put all that information into here as we start to define that overall system. And this is where you want to start to think about, well, am I going to define my entire organization as my system boundary? Or do I have an enclave type solution where I've subdivided my network just for those individuals and systems that are part of the CUI data flow? Or am I going to do everybody? That's kind of what you've got to determine as you start to build this plan. Then we're going to go into those individual practices, and we're going to start to answer those questions and build the information around these. So you can, click on here, and it's going to take me to the last practice that I was looking at. And this is the one I'll address in just a minute. But I could also, I can also just click through these. This will take me to 3.2.4, or I'm sorry, 3.3.1. Sorry, there is no 4 in that. Or I can also do it from that first dashboard page. And as I fill out these different controls and the different sections, the dashboard is keeping up with me, right? I'm 33% done in my overall assessment. I've completed the org info. I've still got some things to fill out in my system info and on my practices. I've got some POAMs. Currently, those are all closed, but since I don't have any practices closed, I'll probably be creating new POAMs because I haven't implemented all my different practices. I'm keeping track of my SPRS score as I go, so the system is scoring me based on that NIST 800-171 assessment guide as I go through. I can also scroll right through these different practices. and jump to a practice I particularly want to address. So I've written a policy and procedure around 3.2.3. So we're going to look to implement this particular control and, put all the supporting information around it. So in this, if you're using a third party, whether that be a cloud service or an MSP, what we typically recommend is that in your implementation statement, you basically call that out, right? So, this is for a company called Glory Minerals. So the top part of this is what Glory Minerals does. We're utilizing a cloud service, or an external service provider, and also an MSP. And so I'm also calling out what those organizations do as well, and what they provide as part of their body of evidence to say that they do these things. Because this is your system security plan, and you're going to need to prove if you're leveraging a service that these services meet the requirements. So I'm going to go back into the tool. I'm going to go to, I just forgot where I was, 3.2.3. So I'm going to go to 3.2.3. I'm going to either go in and start to type in my implementation, or, in this case, I'm just going to cut and paste. All right, so this is what I've got. I'm going to go through. There's some parts I still need to update because I've got some square brackets and things like that. So this is what I'm implementing, right? I've got a WYSIWYG editor, so I can, highlight, bullet point, all those things here in the implementation statement. It's keeping that in with all those things that I've put in that implementation statement. Now, I'd also want to put in if I've got evidence that supports this, right? So I linked this to the document I actually have this written in as well. And I could have just done that, and I could say, see evidence. Now, because this is awareness and training, some of the evidence might be things like logs of your, if you're using a learning management system, and your learning management system, keeps track of who's completed what training. You might want to link to those, those certificates or logs or things like that prove that your organization has done that training, or your individuals have provided that training. All of those kinds of things would go into your evidence. Once you've, say that you've done these things, right? This is what you need to do. These are the different things that you need to consider. And so once you've kind of satisfied all these things, you can go ahead and move this from not implemented to implement. You can move this from not started to concluded. And so now we've reviewed our practices. We know that they're in place. We know we have evidence and all the other supporting documentation. So, and that's really one of the other key things. When you work on one of these controls, it's not enough just to say what you do, right? You also should have the evidence associated with that control as well. You should have the information from the third parties you might be utilizing. If you're utilizing something like GCC High, and that is a FedRAMP cloud, a FedRAMP moderate, a FedRAMP registered cloud service, you could get Microsoft's body of evidence as one of their customers. Or if you're utilizing Exostar as part of the delivery model, they may be the ones that provide that M365 body of evidence to you, because we get it from Microsoft and inherit those as part of our overall solution. So you're going to need all of that stuff as part of your overall evidence for those particular controls. Then, as we go through and we address these things, and if we close this, we mark it as implemented, we go back to our dashboard, then this particular control will be, marked as completed. Our score has been raised from, I think it was 14 before, now it's 15. So this is one of those 1-point controls. And we can move on to, the next one. In this case, we could go to 3.1.2 because that one is still in progress. We could click on that. If we don't yet know what to do about this, and we've got some information, right? We've got an implementation statement. We've got some evidence around this. We're still in the process of verifying these kinds of things. We can then go ahead and create the POAM around this particular control. And this is that internal plan, if you will, that we're going to have to address this particular control. So this is 3.1.2. I'm going to assign it to myself. Give it a statement. We have a, we can, if we have started this, we can mark it as in progress rather than not started. It was created today. Do we have a milestone where we want to mark this against? All those kinds of things. So this then allows us to manage this overall program, to close these out. As we close them out, since this is assigned to me, I would want to close it out. As we do, we're going to, again, right, this, because it's not implemented yet, our dashboard score will not have moved because we still have an open item. But this will show up as one of those POAMs that we have to actually get accomplished or get completed so we can raise our score and move on to the next item. So this is how we're going to manage that overall program. We're also going to start within, as I mentioned, we're gathering all that information. So all these practices and everything are going to have the evidence associated with them. We're going to be able to pull that evidence out for that C3PAO organization when they come on site. So we've got links to all the different evidence. We could download all this information because typically that C3PO organization is going to want to see not only your SSP, but also the evidence associated with that. When they come on site, you'll be able to utilize this platform to walk through with them your SSP, as well as provide that documentation, right? In this case, this will also build that system security plan and the evidence list and all of that kind of information that you'll need, again, for that C3PAO organization on the build up to the time they actually come out to visit you and do that assessment. Or if you're a fully, kind of cloud-based company, they'll come, they're not going to come on site because you have no on-site stuff. They're going to do it virtually, but you can virtually walk them through here as well. So that's how we're going to manage that overall program and keep up to date on where we are and what we're doing. So the results of your overall thing will be that CMC program. The output of this is going to be that system security plan and that SPRS score. As you build up that SPRS score, you're gonna build that from your plan of action and milestones. You'll also want to set those periodic tasks that you have, because in most cases, you do have to periodically review the different controls, make sure they're still relevant, make sure you're still doing those things. And you may just have a monthly meeting where we discuss these things and we knock them off, right? So those things need to be part of that overall program. Now, Certification Assistant is part of Exostar's CMMC Ready suite. It includes 2 other SaaS applications. One of those, Policy Pro, is what gives you the templates to build up those policies and procedure statements for those different control families. It gives you a template for those. It suggests where you might want to customize that template for your own organization. It then has an editor or an AI model that you can feed that written statement into. It will then score those policies and procedure statements. It'll give you feedback on what you may need to include to improve that. If for some, if you already have a number of policies already written for other compliance or other standard bodies, like, I don't know, maybe you've done an ISO certification and you've written a bunch of policy statements and control measures, et cetera, in place for that, and you want to reuse those as part of this, you can take those and run those through this same AI engine for the different CMMC controls and get that same indication of what you might need to update, what keywords and key elements that you need to write into that. Then if you're looking for a solution where you actually store, process, or transmit CUI, Exostar has a secure enclave solution. It's our managed Microsoft 365. This is a Teams environment up in Microsoft's Azure GCC High, managed and supported by Exostar as the external service provider, providing that FedRAMP moderate cloud service for you, managing it for you through TechOps, through Exostar TechOps and support. Now, if you need some help in putting all this together and you're daunted by that task, Exostar also has a number of partners. You can find these on the Exostar partner pages. You can also work with these partners within the Exostar tools themselves. So, you can give a partner access to your certification assistant. They can help you manage that overall CMMC program there within it. They can also do the different kinds of assessments. They can do gap assessments and readiness assessments. They can do mock assessments before you bring that third party. And then some of these partners are themselves C3PAOs, so you can engage with them as well to do that final assessment or that once every 3-year assessment as part of that CMMC requirement. So my colleague is going to put up a poll. So please take a minute, fill out that poll. Love to get your feedback on how this particular session was for you. Also, I think we asked whether or not you'd like additional topics. We do also host a general CMMC webinar once a month, and then we also offer product webinars also once a month, and in some cases, once a week. So as I mentioned, we did get a few questions. We got 3 of them before today's session, so I'm going to go ahead and answer those. So where and how can I monitor the status of 48 CFR? What is the specific URL to use for checking approval status? I wish I had a better answer than there isn't one. Like, there is no one URL that says, show me current status of 48 CFR. This is a fluid process. Now, but there are various places you can check. So for example, I think I had it up here. I may not. Let me do this. DoD, CMMC. So this is DoD's page, right? They give very good updates, right? Big bright letters of the last major thing that happened in CMMC. So, this is a great source of information, and this URL is in the slide deck. They've also, got a number of additional material as well available here. So this is the one site I would say where you can get definitive information of where things stand today. but I don't have a URL where you can actually get the status of 48 CFR. I monitor a lot of different stuff just to make sure I'm kept up to date. So let me go back. So what are your recommendations for BYOD, bring your own device, for user personal cell phones that have access to Office 365, given the technical complexities with Office 365, iPhone, and Androids? So as a bare minimum, if you're going to allow people to access those applications on their personal cell phones, you're going to have to manage those devices. You're going to have to choose some type of managed device software that you and your employees agree to download and maintain that MDM software on those personal devices. It is really the only way to ensure that those things are patch updated and do all those things that they need to do for those. Now, if you don't want to do that, then really the only other thing is to not allow users to access Office 365 on those personal devices, and only allow them to be used on managed devices that you provide. So if you're going to do BYOD, you're still probably going to have to choose some kind of MDM solution for your users and provide that as a download. So for number 3, it would be helpful to understand which versions of NIST 800-171 and 800-171 alpha that CMMC2 are aligned with. The reason is that NIST shows that SPS, or that NIST 800-171 Rev 2 has been withdrawn. It's been superseded by Rev 3. Now, I talked about this during the presentation. I understand there is this confusion, but CMMC specifically calls out NIST 800-171 Rev 2. It calls out the NIST 800-171 alpha that's associated with Rev 2 as the assessment guide. So for CMMC, for DoD CMMC, it's NIST 800-171 Rev 2. Yes, Rev 3 is out there, and that supersedes Rev 2. However, for this particular program, it is Rev 2. So hopefully that clarifies that for everybody. And I think that's the only, those were the only questions we got. So again, we're going to be providing some additional help, including that website I was just at from the DoD, that will hopefully give you additional answers and additional sources of information for you. Whoops, I'm sorry, that was last week's question or last month's questions. Thought I erased that, but I didn't. We also have additional webinars, as I mentioned, coming up. We do a monthly CMMC general topic webinar. We just had one last week with a C3PAO, Kyle Lai, one of our partners. That was a great session with him to talk about what to expect from the C3PAO and how that engagement's going to go. There is a recording of that up on our website if you'd like to do it. As I mentioned before, we also have specific product sessions. Weekly, we have a demo and QA of our managed Microsoft 365. That's every Thursday at 2. We also have one on our Policy Pro application. That'll be next week, same bat time, same bat channel. So it'll be on Wednesday at 2 o'clock next week. Then we also have some general supply chain webinars as well. So if you'd like to see what's coming up, if you'd like to sign up for one of our other webinars, come to the Exostar events page and sign up there for any of our upcoming webinars as well. Love to have you. So again, everybody, I want to thank you all for your time and attention today. Have a great rest of the day and a great rest of the week. Thanks again so much.